And before I get started, I want to introduce the lady next to me, who's the director of the Crested Butte Heritage Museum, Melinda Holm, and she is replacing Ashley O'Hara tonight. Ashley is in the Seattle airport, ready to go to Alaska and ski. So I'll turn it over to Melinda.
Welcome, everyone. You can also see we have a special guest in the back, one of our miners. The table shakes occasionally. We don't know if it's us or if it's the presence of the miners. So if we wiggle a little bit, they're just saying hi. So welcome. We're so honored to have Dr. Duane Vandenbusche with us again, doing all kinds of Crested Butte history. Today, we're going to talk about mining. So just a few other things regarding the Crested Butte Museum located on Elk Avenue. Stop by anytime. We're open every day, 11 to 5 on Sunday through Thursdays. And then on Fridays, we're open until 6 p.m. We will be closing weekend of CBMR closing. So we will be closing on the 2nd so we can enjoy the 3rd up on the mountain. There are a few events that will be taking place here shortly at the museum. It's a busy month here in March. We are going to start having tours on Wednesdays with Glow Cunningham, 2 o'clock, Elk Avenue tours. You can also join us for tours here inside the museum on Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Literally just sharing some stories about Tony, about some of the locals that are featured on our wall, the gondola, and other things that we have in our beautiful museum. We have a play coming up called Let 'Em Run, the Great Ski Race of 1886, featuring yours truly.
A bit roll.
Just a teeny one. And that will be taking place on the 11th and 12th of March. So we're looking forward to that. Mark Riemann will be also in it. We have a couple other surprise guests. More information is available on our webpage for that as well. If you'd like to join us on March 17th, we're doing a collaboration with the Nordic Center, a historical ski or snowshoe, you have the choice, to the Magic Meadows Yurt Bistro with Ashley and Anna Marie here from the museum. They'll give a historic talk. There'll be light drinks and food available. That's included in your ticket price. On March 18th, we're hosting another night here. It's called A Night at the Museum. We will have Donnie and Kay Cook discussing mountain biking, as well as Dr. Duane Vandenbusche and Ashley discussing mining upstairs. So you'll be able to see some of our collections that no one else can see. So it's a pretty special night. And then on April 2nd, we're having another fun pub crawl. That's going to be the end of season pub crawl. It'll be at the Eldo, Kachivers, and Talk of the Town, featuring Floshank has-beens, some ski instructors from past, and also ski patrollers. So it'll be a fun way to bring the weekend together on April 2nd. And then we'll have live music by alternative people at Talk of the Town. Your free ticket, or your ticket will get you free entry into the alternative people. We also have a book signing on March 30th at 5:30 with Paul Anderson. So a lot's going on. If you want to find out more information, visit our webpage, CrestedButteMuseum.com, or give us a call here at the museum, 349-1880, and I will gladly help you get tickets, answer any questions that you may have. The program is being recorded and will be available on our webpage and YouTube page, probably after Ashley gets back from her vacation. So give us a little time to do all the editing, and we'll get it on there for you to enjoy later. If you have any questions about any of our programming, once again, CrestedButteMuseum.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. And thank you to our sponsors, which are Kachivers, John Bridges and Construction, and also Diane Woolery in honor of John Inkowich. We'll have time for questions at the end. You're going to enter it in your chat box for the trivia and anything else that comes about. So we have a lot of photos to share. It's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Melinda. We're going to talk about Crested Butte in the North Country. Next week, it's going to be Crested Butte and the Great Coal Mining. Crested Butte ethnic people and the Great Coal Mining. So we'll start off by, I want to thank the sponsors also that Melinda talked about, and remind everybody that in 2 weeks, we're going to have a polka party here with Pete Dunda. He's going to talk for about 15 minutes on the music of Crested Butte, and then everybody is going to kick up their heels, and there'll be free refreshments, free beer. And we'll be dancing the polka and the waltzes and the schottisches right here in the Crested Butte Museum. We also have a trivia question at the end of the session today, and Melinda will tell you how to answer, and first come, first serve for one of my books, which I send out on the very next day. So hopefully everybody will pay attention and be ready to go with a trivia question. So here we go. The decade of the 1860s in the Gunnison country was the placer mining era. Probably 400 to 500 miners were in the Gunnison country tapping out the streams. Placer mining involved what we call free gold: shot, wire, grain, flour, dust, or nugget. It didn't need any smelting. It was pure gold. You put it in your saddlebags and rode away. And that decade lasted for about 10 years. And then with the streams all panned out and the Indians very dangerous and short seasons, that era came to an end. And the era that followed it in the 1870s, starting around the middle part of the 1870s, was the lode mining era, LODE, lode, hard rock, or quartz mining. And the day of the individual miner was now over, because now you had to go deep into the bowels of the earth to get the ore. And that meant a lot of money and a lot of technology and a lot of men. And that meant that when you got the ore up to the top, you had to use smelting. So if you can imagine going down with a shaft 200 or 300 feet and then crisscrossing every 50 feet with tunnels, what you're trying to do is intersect the main vein or intersect the lode, the mother lode, if you were lucky. So the day of the individual miner is gone. Now, good gold at that time was said to be $200 to the ton. And here's what they meant by that. Gold sold at $20 a ton in the 1870s. And you bring up 1 ton of muck and rock and debris from the bottom of the mine, and somewhere in that 1 ton of muck and rock and debris are 10 ounces of gold times $20 an ounce equals $200. That was rich ore. Now, your job, of course, was to find the gold in that 1 ton of muck. And in the 1860s and 1870s, a metallurgist report said this, and I'm quoting, "Colorado's gold ore can only be reduced by a long and complicated and expensive process." In other words, there was no good way of reducing it. In the year 1867, the Boston and Colorado Mining Company sent a trained metallurgist from Brown University, Nathan Hill, over to their mine at Central City. And Nathan Hill took samples to the best miners in the world. He went by wagon to the Mississippi River, by rail to the East Coast, and then by boat to Wales, where the Welsh miners have been mining for 700 years. If they couldn't reduce the gold, then you couldn't do it. And the gold onto a copper mat or a copper base. And then Nathan Hill took that technology back to the United States. And 6 years later, he figured out a process to get the gold off of the copper mat or the copper base, saving Colorado's gold industry. Now, everybody initially in the Gunnison country looked for gold because gold sold at 20 an ounce and silver sold at $1.25 an ounce. 16 to 1 was the ratio between gold and silver set by the federal government. And they got an economic law called Gresham's Law, which goes something like this: the dearer the metal, the higher the value. In other words, the less you have of something, the more valuable it is. And there was less gold than there was silver. Hence, gold was 16 times more valuable than silver. And everybody began looking for gold. And a lot of times they passed up silver. Aside from the placer mining, the Gunnison country really didn't have much gold. But in the 1870s, silver discoveries came, and the Gunnison country was looked at as another Leadville. Rich investors flocked in, 2 railroads headed in, and thousands of miners flocked into the area. If you could find silver and gold at Monarch, a mining town on the east side of the divide, and Lake City, not far away in the San Juan, then mineral wealth certainly had to exist in the Gunnison country. Other metals also became very important. Copper was a big one. And copper was very important because electricity had just started. And you need copper for electricity, for direct current and alternating current electricity. And then you also had lead and zinc. which were very, very important in industry. And now we move to 1874 and the great surveyor Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden, who stood on top of Mount Teocalli, looked off in the distance and saw those two great mountains that he called the Crested Buttes. One later on got the name of Gothic, and then they dropped the S off Crested Butte. Ominously, and I'll mention him a little later, Ferdinand Hayden was at a place called Marble later on, when a tremendous mudslide came down Carbonate Creek. And that was something that would plague Marble all the time. Crested Butte. They found coal in Crested Butte as early as 1877 and 78. Sant Robinson and Howard K. Smith. But initially, Crested Butte became known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains, the jumping off point for all the great mining camps. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here we go on the great mining camps, the great silver camps of the Gunnison country. And we'll start off with the greatest one, and that was Ruby Irwin. Irwin was located right where Coal Creek headed and Anthracite Creek headed. Coal Creek coming back towards Crested Butte, Anthracite going all the way down, finally going down into Paonia and into the North Fork Valley. Scarp Ridge towered above it, along with Purple, Owen, and Ruby Peaks, and beautiful Lake Brennan with a D on the end. Later on, that lake was renamed Irwin, Lake Irwin, for Dick Irwin, who we'll talk about momentarily. Jim Brennan had been an early prospector. And there you get a great look at Lake Irwin before there were many people there. And this is taken around 1950. And that's Scarp Ridge in the background. The only two ways into Irwin in the early days was up Ohio Creek, over Ohio Pass at 10,033 feet, and then into Irwin at the same elevation. Ruby, the initial name, was named for the silver of the region. And that was the first town up the gulch. And a whole series of names came with little villages up that gulch. White Cloud, Ruby, Irwin, Silvergate, and Hopewell. But eventually, the name changed to Irwin for Dick Irwin, a great prospector who had mined from Canada all the way down to Mexico. He had been a Pony Express rider. He had been a happy wanderer. And all those little camps were now combined into one called Irwin. 40 feet of snow fell during the winter of 1879 and 80. When a young man came into Irwin during the spring of 1880, he saw a stovepipe sticking out of the snow. And he asked the miner, where were all the buildings? And the miner said, well, it's below the snow. And then a little later on, when all the snow melted, the young man found out that he had been taken because there wasn't anything below. They had just put a stovepipe in the snow and sold him a lot. And there was nothing below the lot. The early route into Irwin, as I said, came over Ohio Pass, and men carrying 50 to 100 pounds of supplies on their back made the 20-mile trip for $10 to $20 a day, leaving at 3 o'clock a.m., traveling on the frozen snow crust and carrying those supplies into the camp. This is where there was too much snow for anybody else to get in. Many famous people came to Irwin in the early days trying to hit it rich. Wild Bill Hickok, the Earp brothers, Bat Masterson, Bill Nuttall of vaudeville fame, Teddy Roosevelt, U.S. Grant after he had been president, and a man named James B. Grant, the big smelter man from Leadville, who said that Irwin probably was not going to be a great mining camp because it had knife blade seams. Cornelius Vanderbilt was another man who came in along with Baron Rothschild. No dairy existed, so milk and butter came from a ranch at Crested Butte. Instead of skimming cream to make butter and giving Irwin skim milk, and I'm quoting now, they hit on a novel plan of leaving the cream on the milk, and by the time they had chugged and jolted over the rough roads 10 miles to get to Irwin, they had a lump of butter in their milk can, and then had fresh milk and butter to sell. The town was inside the Indian reservation, And during the Meeker Massacre and the uprising of the Utes in 1879, Irwin built a log stockade and had a group called the Ruby Scouts to defend against the Indians. And one time, when they said, if anybody sees any Indians, fire 3 shots and we'll know that the Indians are attacking. Well, one of the miners went out one day, saw a bear, fired 3 fast shots, killed the bear, and then took his time skinning it out. When he came back into Irwin, every gun before the log stockade was pointed at him, and everybody was a little upset, but the guy had just forgotten. The first great mine in Irwin came in July of 1879, when William Fisher got stuck with his ox team in Ruby Gulch. Orville Mace, a prospector, pulled him out with his mules. Fisher told Mace that he would give him a half interest in the first mine he found. The next morning, Fisher found ruby, native, and wire silver up a nearby gulch, and he laid out 2 claims. He gave Mace his choice, the Ruby King, which Mace took and then sold for $100,000. Fisher took the Forest Queen, which he sold for $40,000. And there you get a great look at Irwin City, they say, and look at the sign, says City Bakery, and then the assay office is right behind it. And that's really the start, and you can see a few log cabins, but mostly tents, 1879. An interesting story, and Melinda doesn't have it in her notes. Jack Haverly, who had been a great vaudeville man, came into Irwin very early, and he saw a poker game. And everybody looked at him and kind of sized him up as a dude, and when Haverly said, "What's the limit?" And one of the guys said, "The sky." And Jack Haverly began to peel off $20 bills, and the guy who said it gulped and said, "I meant our local sky. It's only $20 high here." Jack Haverly became a big investor in Irwin. 4,000 people came to Irwin and the surrounding area in 1880. And there you get a great look at it, and you can see that big church over on the right side of your photograph, and frame buildings. It was a going Jesse in 1880. Most of those people were in and around Irwin and up every nearby gulch, and they only stayed through the fall. The next year, in 1881, Irwin had 529 houses, many tents, a post office, the bank, lots selling for $5,000, and a main street running a mile through Ruby Gulch, 23 saloons, 7 dance halls, and numerous houses of prostitution existed. John E. Phillips started the Elk Mountain Pilot that gave out the news. There's one of the hotels, the Hotel Belmont. That wasn't the big one. The Windsor Hotel was, but this one was 2 stories high, and it catered to the wealthy. Irwin was a wide open town with dance halls filled nightly, and Hambone Jane, Durango Nell, Cockeye, and other women providing entertainment. Tom Forehand, one of the men who was in Irwin very early, said this, and I'm quoting, "They drank down glasses of the foulest liquor that was ever distilled outside of some place which savored of Hades. Every saloon was a gambling hall, and all were crowded nightly. Keno, roulette, craps, and horse poker, faro, and all the other standard games were running day and night. A theater holding 600 people gave nightly and sometimes matinee performances and made more money than any legitimate business in the camp." So Irwin was booming. It also had a male club called the Irwin Club, and wives always wondered what went on there, and rumors were rampant. And there you get a great look. And if you look at this one, some of you folks have heard of D. May and F, a great company in Denver. That's where it started, right there in Irwin. And right behind it is Reasonable Abe. I don't know who Reasonable Abe was. So these wives are always wondered what went on at that club. One day, the men, to dispel rumors, threw a ball with wives and girlfriends invited. One of the bachelors was disgruntled, and he sprinkled itching powder where the women sat, and they all left by 9 p.m., more convinced than ever of their suspicions. The Irwin Cemetery was just north of Kepler Pass, about 2 miles away. I think you get a good look at Irwin in 1881 and some of the big frame buildings they had 2 stories high. The most famous grave marker in that cemetery is that of a 17-year-old girl named Barry Bambro, who died of scarlet fever in 1881. And on her grave marker is this famous saying, "All you people as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon shall be. Prepare yourselves to follow me." And some wise ass, about 3 or 4 years later, wrote another couple of lines. "To follow you, I'll not consent until I found which way you went." In 1884, the boom in Irwin had ended. Now there's the school in Irwin in 1881. So by 1884, the boom had ended. The weather was too tough. Failure to get the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad, which was headed in, and knife blade seams of silver, and of course the silver panic of 1893. Tom Forehand, who had been mayor, went back to Irwin in 1904 and was shocked that it was done. The good times, as the songs say, were all gone, and we're bound for moving on. 4 strong winds. In the 1960s and 70s, the colonel of the U.S. Air Force, John Hahn, would come in and work the Forest Queen mine. And he'd go in maybe about 10 feet every summer. And in his cabin, he had a refrigerator stocked with food and drink, and a little sign there on the table said, "Take whatever you want, just replace it the next time you come in." In 1973, Dan Thurman built the Irwin Lodge, which is not open right now because of sewage problems. And today, a company called 11 does a lot of cat skiing up at Irwin. So that's the great town of Irwin. We now move to another great town. Irwin was about 10 miles west of Crested Butte. We now head up to about 8 miles north of Crested Butte in the great town of Gothic, the city of silver wires. And there is Gothic in 1880. Tents in the foreground, pretty good sized buildings up the gulch as you move north. Gothic was located at the junction of the East River and Copper Creek. East Maroon Pass was 6 miles to the east at 11,800 feet, and right next to Copper Lake, one of the major trails running into Aspen in the days before Aspen had a railroad. And it was very common before Aspen had a railroad to see 500 to 1,000 burros with 200 pounds of ore on their back, coming up East Maroon Creek, going over the pass, down into Gothic, down Copper Creek into Gothic, and then going to the railhead at Crested Butte, and then loading the ore on the railroad and taking it out. And then those burros would get 200 pounds of supplies on their back and go right back into Aspen over East Maroon Pass. One of my top students, Carl Haas, has written a great master's thesis on Gothic called Gothic City of Silver Wires. And Gothic Mountain, 12,625 feet in elevation, towering like a cathedral over Gothic. Gustav Erickson, who died in the Gunnison Hospital in 1928, was one of the earliest people to come into the region. He had come to the United States from Sweden in 1870 and came here in 1873 when he was 30 years old. And he stayed around Gothic for a number of years. He was alone in the district except for a Negro man who was with him. And Erickson told of the death of the fellow during the winter and how he had to bury the body in the Stolenstill Spring. The black man was named General Green, who first penetrated into the Elk Mountains in June of 1872 in company with other men, including Jim Brennan, one of the early prospectors, and for whom Lake Brennan was named, later on Lake Irwin. Erickson stayed in Gothic prospecting and mining until 1903, when at the age of 60, he moved to Gunnison and lived in a cottage behind the Levita Hotel. Gothic began as a result of rich wire silver discoveries in 1879 by 2 old prospectors, John and David Jennings. In May of 79, grub staked by Orville Sands, a wealthy hotel owner from Chicago, the two found the Sylvanite mine, one of the best in Gunnison country history, 3 miles up Copper Creek. That started a rush, and Gothic was born. William McKee, who came to Gothic as a young boy in 1879, talked about the early people who came in there, and a foot race. And Gothic had one of the fastest men in the Gunnison country. And a lot of betting went on. And Crested Butte had a pretty fast runner. And on a Sunday in Gothic, they paired off against each other. And men in Gothic found out, maybe erroneously, that the guy in Gothic that they bet on was going to throw the race and make a lot of money. And they told him, if you don't win, we're going to kill you. Needless to say, he had great impetus to run well and did defeat the guy from Crested Butte. Roads and trails ran everywhere. 2 smelters were created in 1879. 2 sawmills came in. 1,000 people were in. 200 buildings stood. Only 26 families stayed in Gothic during the winter of 79 and 80, one of the worst in Gunnison country history. The snow was 6 feet on the level, and the only contact with the outside world came from Louis Barthel, the mail carrier between Crested Butte and Gothic, who skied in alone along the East River. In May of 1880, prospectors again flocked in. By the end of the summer, 950 people were in town and several thousand outside of the camp. 3,000 to 4,000 people in Gothic. There is a great photo of the 3-story high Olds Hotel in Gothic. By midsummer of 1880, Gothic had 5 lawyers, 4 grocery stores, 3 restaurants, 2 general merchandise stores, a bank, 3 doctors, 2 hotels, and many saloons. The hotels were the Olds, built in 1879, you're looking at it, and the 3-story Gothic hotel built by Captain Bunn, who was a famous skier. The Elk Mountain Bonanza was the first paper in town. Now there's a good look, people, at Gothic Peak in the background at 12,625 feet, and that is the 3-story high Gothic hotel. And it looks pretty good in the year 1880. The Elk Mountain Bonanza, first paper in town, came out in June of 1880. In 1881, it changed in ownership and became known as the Gothic Miner. The Miner carried on a feud with Gunnison, referring to Gunnison as Windville and Sagetown. The last Gothic paper was the Gothic Silver Record, and it ran from 1882 to 1887. Ex-President U.S. Grant visited Gothic in 1880. He was escorted into town by a brass band and a blast from the camp's powder supply. He was given a reception and a ball at the Olds Hotel, visited the mines of the region, and after a 2-day visit, he headed north to Schofield. The Sylvanite was the great mine of Gothic, and there it is, almost covered up by snow. 2 men working in the winter, stockpiling ore for the spring of the year, and they had a hard time doing it. This mine was sold to Eastern capitalists in 1879 for $200,000. That would be in the millions today. From 1880 to 1910, it produced $1 million, much of it wire silver. Now, this is when silver was selling at $1.25 an ounce. It is now selling at 17. So 17 times 1 million. By today's prices, the Sylvanite turned out $17 million. At 11,800 feet in Sylvanite Basin, life was very tough for the 25 men who worked the mine. And you can see them right there. In the winter, a ventilation hole was made in the roof of their cabin and kept open. Water came from a 30-gallon tank attached to the back of the cook stove. Snow was shoveled in twice a day. Pork was stocked in during the fall. By midwinters, miners hated it because that's all they had to eat. Now there is the tram that ran from the Sylvanite down below. And the ore cars came right out of the mine, and you can see one of the ore cars down below and one of the ore cars coming down. And this is at the Sylvanite. Gothic was a major supply point for the North Country. And as I mentioned earlier, up to 1,000 burros went through town en route to Crested Butte. Ernest Ingersoll, a reporter in the early 1880s, recalled, and I'm quoting, "The streets are filled with the trains of burros, and at night the drowning cry of the car dealers and the yells of hilarious prospectors resound through the darkness." The East River Toll Road was the main one to Gothic in 1879 on the east side of Crested Butte Mountain. The Crested Butte and Gothic Toll Road ran into Gothic on the west side. And the Aspen, Maroon Creek, and Gothic Toll Road went from Gothic over East Maroon Pass and on into Aspen. Gothic peaked in 1881 and then began to slide. Now there is the silver after it had been smelted at the Tamichi Valley Smelter in Gunnison, and that silver, which is in bars, came right out of the Sylvanite mine and other great mines around Gothic. The cost of transportation, the slide of silver prices, long winters, and the failure to get a good working smelter and no railroad began to take Gothic down. By the silver panic of 1893, very few people lived there. Gothic did revive, however. A new smelter in 1903, then a powerhouse put in up Mountain King at the head of Rustler Gulch, a 20-foot dam right outside of Gothic, providing power through a flume. And Gothic kind of revived around the year 1910. It was pretty much done, however, in the early 1920s. In 1928, Dr. John C. Johnson of the Biology Department of Western State, having lost his job because he wouldn't join the Ku Klux Klan, went over to Gothic and began the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, a permanent home and base for the study of plants and animals of the Rocky Mountain area. It was never connected with any college, and it had academic summer sessions for students from all over the U.S. Today, it's in its 84th year. Ian Billick in the famous Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory doing pioneer studies on climate change and global warming. The guy who never left had come into Gothic in 1879, and his name was Garwood Judd. Judd Falls, and there's Garwood Judge next to a lean-to, and that lean-to is right next to his cabin. He came in 79, he died there in 1931. He had been there for 52 years, famous as the man who stayed. He spent summers in Gothic entertaining tourists and winters in Gunnison. In 1928, Lee Orr of the Fox Film Company made a two-reel movie about him in Gothic. Today, Gothic still has the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory and a number of buildings. Some are new that they put up. The great city of silver wires. Pioneering work is done by the Biological Lab, and a famous guy who's just written up in the Atlantic Magazine and the Washington Post, Billy Barr, is there. Billy came there in the 1970s, 73, and has kept weather records and cold records, snow records ever since that time. A legend. And he's done a lot for the people who study that kind of stuff now, because back then they weren't studying it as much. We now move out of Gothic, and we're going to go from Gothic up to a town called Schofield. And as we go up to Schofield, we are going to go by beautiful Emerald Lake with avalanche danger. And then from Emerald Lake, we are going over 10,707-foot high Schofield Pass with a Route 401, one of the most famous mountain bike trails in the world, going up to the right 600 feet and then coming back down towards Gothic. But we're going to go by Schofield Pass, and we're going to go about a mile down, and right there is the West Maroon Creek trailhead. And that's where people hike through one of the most beautiful flower areas in the world in the summer, 40 different kinds, all the way to the top of West Maroon Pass at 12,400 feet. And from there, it's 7 miles down to Maroon Lake, and then you catch the bus on into Aspen. But we're not going to do that. We're going down past the West Maroon Trailhead. We're going 2 miles through Schofield Park, and then we come to the town of Schofield. Schofield got started in the year 1879 as a silver camp, located at the north end of the park and started by a man named B.F. Schofield. By the summer of 1880, the town had 30 buildings, 2 sawmills, and a large business house owned by a man named Louis Badie, who freighted in 200,000 pounds of supplies valued at $50,000 and sold them out in 45 days. A little later, 1,000 prospectors were in and around Schofield during the summer of 1880. By 1881, 50 frame buildings, 2 stores, 4 saloons, 2 restaurants, 3 real estate offices, 1 livery stable, a jail, a post office, and a huge 3-story Elk Mountain hotel. It also had a great smelter, and you can see the remains of that today right along the river, right along Rock Creek, now known as the Crystal River. Ex-President U.S. Grant visited Schofield in 1880, coming up from Gothic. He'd also been to Irwin a little earlier. The miners tried to lose mining stock to him in a poker game to say that he owned shares there, but they failed. When they tried to get him drunk so they could do it, that failed also because U.S. Grant could hold his liquor pretty well. Ellen Jack was one of Schofield's most colorful characters. She was born in 1842 and married a Navy officer named Charles Jack. When he and 3 children died, Ellen Jack came to Colorado to make her fortune. She came to the Gunnison country in 1880 over Cottonwood Pass and into Taylor Park. She had with her diamonds, government bonds, and a .44 pistol. Her best investment was the Great Black Queen mine near Crystal. Ellen Jack recounted her stories in a great book called Fate of a Fairy. She told wild stories about fights with Indians, love affairs, owning wealthy mines, and escaping the elements of the mountains. She died in 1921 at the age of 79, a character right to the end. Schofield began to fade in 1883. And in 1885, the post office closed and most of the population moved down to Crystal. It would revive periodically until the turn of the century, but really about 1900, Schofield was done for good. From there, we are going to continue north. And from Schofield, we are going to go to the head of the Devil's Punch Bowls. And we're heading into Crystal. And there you see that great silver camp on the screen. Now, as we go across Rock Creek or the Crystal River, we are descending a 20% grade. And on the bottom of that 20% grade are 2 pools of water, and they are called the Devil's Punch Bowls. And that is a very difficult road, and more about that a little later. Crystal is located on the Crystal River at 9,000 feet in elevation, 5 miles upstream from Marble and 5 miles from Schofield Park. To get to it, you had to go through some of the toughest country in all of Colorado. Silver brought prospectors in, and Crystal City began in 1880. In 1881, it had 22 cabins and jack trails as the only means of transportation. In 1883, the Canyon Road was finished from Schofield, and Crystal's population rose to 600. Isolation and transportation were major problems with that silver camp. By the mid-'80s, though, it got a post office, and the great Al Johnson was the postmaster, and he also ran the Crystal River Current newspaper, which lasted until 1892. Crystal also had saloons, a stage line, 2 general stores, a pool hall, and over 70 houses. It had the Crystal Hotel and the famous Crystal Club and the Crystal Snowshoe Club, with Al and Fred Johnson and Tom Boughton as the finest skiers. The Lead King Mine, the Black Queen, the Sheep Mountain, and the Whopper were the great mines of the area. Between 1880 and 1892, 100 jack trains daily took ore from the Black Queen to Crested Butte or Carbondale, either coming south or north to hit railheads. The Sheep Mountain Tunnel was another great mine, but it was more famous, Crystal and the Sheep Mountain Tunnel, for the great mill just northwest of the camp. And there it is, the second most photographed spot in Colorado, the famous Crystal Mill. The Crystal Mill was really a powerhouse, and that water coming downhill powered a 90 horsepower turbine. And that turbine shot power to 3 mines on the other side of the road. There's another shot of it. So it wasn't a mill that milled ore, it just provided power as a powerhouse. 20 by 50, overlooking that large dam built on the Crystal River. It operated from 1893 to 1917. Al Johnson, the legendary Al Johnson, was the top citizen of the time. Now there's another great shot of the Crystal Mill, and right alongside of it is a smelter. And that was one of the places where power ran from the mill. The number 1 photograph site in Colorado is Maroon Lake and the Maroon Bells. This is number 2. Johnson had the paper, postmaster, carried the mail, ran a hotel and general store, and owned many mines. We'll say a lot more about him when we get over to the skiing in the Gunnison country. When the silver panic hit in 1893, Crystal went downhill. There it is from above. Low prices, isolation, no railroad, tough winters caused problems. The Crystal River current ended in 1892, replaced by the Silver Lance, which ran until 1899. By 1915, Crystal was a near ghost town. In 1971, a professor from Illinois University was headed up the Devil's Punch Bowl Road from Marble. You get a good look at that road in the 1880s. And he had 12 people in a jimmy. And he said later that it was a rainstorm, that the road gave way, but the road couldn't have given way. It was a very solid road. What happened was he only had 62 miles on that vehicle, and he probably missed a shift. And it went off the side, and 9 people died as they went into the Punch Bowl and the Crystal River. 1 body never recovered. One of the worst one-vehicle accidents in Colorado history. 3 months later, a Jeep went off the road and fell into Emerald Lake about 4 miles away, and 3 more people died. 12 people dying within 3 months on one mountain road. And now from Crystal, we're going to make our way down about 5 miles into the great town of Marble, also located on the Crystal River and highlighted by Yule Creek and Carbonate Creek, which come in right near the town. Now, when you get to Schofield Pass, and we'll come back to this a little bit, if you don't go north like we're going and you hung a left, you're going to go up to Paradise Divide. But we're going to Marble. Marble was discovered in north part of Gunnison County. It is in Gunnison County by Sylvester Richardson, one of the founders of the Gunnison country in 1873 when he was part of the John Parsons expedition. 8 years later, it was laid out as a silver town. When the silver panic came, and even before that, Marble discovered that White House Mountain above it was filled completely with Leadville limestone, pure white marble. In 1895, Marble got the contract for the interior of the Colorado State Capitol building, 140,000 square feet. When you go to the Capitol building, all the stone inside is marble from Marble. The outside is granite from the Aberdeen Granite Quarry south of Gunnison. By 1897, the stone was taken by sled in the winter, 3 3/4 miles down to the town, and then eventually taken by wagon to Carbondale and shipped out on rail. By that year, 5 quarry openings existed on White House Mountain, and workers lived above it at Quarry Town. Marble took off when Channing Meat came to town, and took over the Colorado Yule Marble Company. He spent $3 million building the marble finishing mill. He had come from shredded wheat, the American Biograph Company. And here is the largest finishing mill in the world. 1,742 feet long, 100 feet wide, the railroad running alongside of it. And that's where they finished most of the marble that came down from the quarries. In 1906, the Crystal River and San Juan Railroad was built up to marble from Carbondale. Channing Meek also replaced sleds and a 9-horse drawn wagon, which took marble from the quarries to the mill. A gigantic 110 horsepower steam tractor was used. And there you see it, 8-foot high wheels, pull 4 wagons, each carrying 20 tons of marble. And there it goes coming into marble. And you can see the sign of that thing by the men running it, and then kind of on the right in back of that left wheel. Very big. The steam tractor, however, couldn't keep up with demand. And as a result, Channing Meek built an electric tramway between the quarries and the mill. It was faster, but more dangerous as it navigated a 17% grade down 3 3/4 miles to the mill. At the quarry, plug and feathers technique was used. Now, there are men working one of those 5 quarry openings, cutting marble. Plug and feathers means that you drill holes in the marble, and then you put water in it, and when the water freezes, it cracks the marble. They also use dynamite, very wasteful process, and then channeling machines. And that's what these guys are using, channeling machines to cut the marble. Down below, a 50-foot wall of marble protected the mill from avalanches. It deflected the snow over the mill and into the Crystal River. In 1903, a fire in New Jersey showed that while granite crumbled with intense heat, marble did not. And this gave a big boost to the marble production. 2,000 people was the peak population in marble around 1912, producing marble for the major public buildings around the nation. Sylvia Smith ran the Marble City Times, clashed with railroads and the Yule Marble Company, the #1 employer in town. She was a muckraker, criticized the companies. They eventually had her arrested, put in jail. 232 people signed a petition to have her leave town on the railroad. And then she sued successfully for $52,000. Channing Meek died in 1912 in a tram accident when air brakes failed and men jumped from the tram, which reached 60 miles an hour. Now, there's a good shot of the tram. You're loading 20-ton blocks of marble onto that electric tramway. It's going down a 17% grade, 3 3/4 miles down to the finishing mill. From 1914 to 1916, marble produced stone for the Lincoln Memorial. 40 trains of 15 cars each carried the marble to Washington, D.C. 500 to 1,000 men were employed, and marble became the top marble producing region in the world. A fire in 1925 caused $500,000 damage to the mill, but the Vermont Marble Company bought the bankrupt marble operation and got a contract to supply marble for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. 75 men worked for a year to cut out that massive stone, 124 tons, allowed to hang in the ropes for about 15 minutes to see what would happen, and then inched 125 feet out of the quarry opening and placed on the electric tram. And there it is, going down the tramway. It went down with 2 electric locomotives, one on each side, to make sure that it didn't go out of control. It took 4 days to go in 3 3/4 miles. Located on a railroad and taken to Proctor, Vermont, where it was cut into 56 tons and put in place at Arlington National Cemetery in 1931. The Depression hurt Marble badly, but two flash floods of 1941 and 45, shades of Hayden talking about it in 1874, killed off Marble operations. A ski area was planned in the late 1960s and early 70s. I'm probably one of the only guys who ever rode the chair. It didn't last very long until the county commissioner shut it down because of avalanche danger. Isolation, lack of demand for marble, tough transportation, and the elements were reasons that Marble faded. Today, however, Marble is a town of about 100 people. It's in Gunnison County, and marble mining is going on again, started by two men in the 1990s. Today, the Carrera Marble Company owns all the quarries. They put a new road in. They got other quarry openings, and they send 40 trucks a day sometime out to Delta. You go by Delta, you'll see it on the left side of the road. From there, the marble is sent to Houston or to the East Coast. And from there, it goes to the Carrera Marble Company in Italy, where it's finished, and then 80% is sent back. So I'm looking at Melinda now, who's telling me the time.
We have 7 minutes.
We have 7 minutes. What is the time right now?
It is 6:53.
That is it, 6:53. I'm not going to interfere with Joe Biden and his State of the Union. That ends it, ladies and gentlemen. Next Tuesday is Crested Butte and coal mining. A lot of great stories of that and the ethnic people. So now Melinda is going to tell you how you answer the question for the book.
All right, so open your chat box. Get your fingers ready. And Duane, take it away.
All right, here is the question. First come, first serve. I want the name of the man who started the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory in 1928. Ex-professor from Western. It is not Judd. There it is, Amy. Amy got it. John C. Johnson, Amy Durison. Amy, I want you to put your address up there, and we are going to send you the book. Congratulations.
Good job, Amy. Good job, everyone.
Are there any questions that anybody has? We got about 6 minutes before everybody's going to hear Joe Biden and the State of the Nation. I can't compete with Joe. Thank you, Stephanie, for the kind comments. Any other comments or questions? Don't forget about that polka party coming up on March the 15th. Free beer.
Free beer here. We're going to have fun. We're going to have it recorded. So if you can't make it, you can still watch it and dance along at home.
Absolutely. There's her address. We want everybody to have your toes tapping as we dance to the beer barrel polka and the Pennsylvania polka and the Liechtensteiner polka.
We might make up a new polka. Why not?
Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
You guys are amazing. Thanks again to our sponsors. We have the Achievers, John Biggers and Diana making that wonderful donation in honor of John. And thanks to our members and our donors to the museum. You guys are fantastic. Yeah. Without you, we couldn't pull this program off.
Paul Fields, thanks, buddy. Great talking to you yesterday. Congratulations. Bill, thank you. Keith, thank you. Amy, we'll get that book out to you tomorrow. Patricia, thank you. Mark Walker, thank you. Great to have you on board, Mark. Wish I could be at your polka party. But Patty, we expect you to be dancing, watching the screen, because Pete Dunn will be playing the polka.
Awesome.
Any other comments or questions before we get off? All right, thanks, everybody. Vandenbusche and Melinda over and out.
And guest.
And yes.